$10,000 invested today will not feel like anything for 7 years. Not a little something, not a small gain you can point to, nothing. That is not a worst case. That is the floor. That is what happens when the math works exactly the way it is supposed to. Here is the number nobody puts on the thumbnail. At an average return of 10% a year, $10,000 becomes about $11,000 after year one. That's $60 a month for a whole year of waiting, less than a tank of gas. By year 3, it is still under $14,000. You've done everything right, and you have almost nothing to show for it. Now stretch the timeline. 15 years, same $10,000, same 10%, no extra contributions, and you're sitting near $42,000. 30 years, and it's over $174,000. Same money, same rate. The only variable that changed was time, and time is exactly the ingredient most people quit on before it does anything. This is the part that should be illegal to leave out of every investing video. Compounding is not slow and then fast. It is slow, 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 and then suddenly it looks fast because you finally have enough years stacked underneath the same percentage. The percentage never changed. Your patience did. There's a reason almost nobody sees this through, and it's not intelligence, and it's not income. It's a specific, well-documented pattern of exactly when people bail, and it happens on a predictable schedule that has a name. That schedule is the 7-5-3-1 rule, and once you see it, you'll never look at a market dip the same way again. Here's what that rule actually is: 7 years, 5 years, 3 years, 1 year. 4 checkpoints, and at each one, a specific percentage of investors abandon the plan, almost always at the exact moment right before the math was about to reward them for staying. Start with year 1. This is where the most people quit, and the data backs it up hard. Historically, in any given single year, the stock market has a meaningfully negative return roughly 1 out of every 4 years. That means if you only look at a 1-year window, you have about a 25% chance of seeing red. Most new investors do not know this going in. They think a bad year means they picked wrong. They did not pick wrong. They picked a 1-year window, which is statistically the worst window to judge anything by. Now stretch to 3 years. The odds of a negative return over any rolling 3-year period drop to somewhere around 10 to 15%, depending on the exact historical stretch you measure. Better, but still enough bad luck to shake someone out right before year 4 or 5 starts doing the heavy lifting. At 5 years, the odds of a negative rolling return fall to roughly 5 to 10%. You're now in territory where most outcomes are positive, but the memory of years 1 through 3 is still fresh enough that people flinch at the first hint of a downturn, even a small one. Then 7 years. Over almost every rolling 7-year period in market history, the outcome is positive. Not guaranteed, nothing in markets is guaranteed, but historically close to it. 7 years is where the noise finally gets outvoted by the signal. Here's the twist that makes this worse than it sounds. The people who quit at year 1 or year 3 are not just missing a few percentage points, they're resetting their own clock. They pull out, wait for things to feel safe again, and reinvest after the recovery has already happened, at a higher price, with a new personal year 1 starting from scratch. They do this 2 or 3 times over a decade and end up with 15 years of calendar time and maybe 4 real years of compounding to show for it. Zoom out and the pattern shows up at scale. Multiple long-term studies on retail investor behavior have found that the average individual investor's return trails the actual market's return by several percentage points a year, not because they picked worse investments, but because of the timing of when they bought and sold. The market was never the problem. The exit button was. Meet Danielle, 34 years old, works in medical billing, brings home about $52,000 a year after tax. 4 years ago, she opened a brokerage account and put in $8,000, her whole emergency cushion beyond the 1 month she kept in checking. She picked a broad index fund. She didn't touch it. For 14 months, nothing happened. It sat at $8,200. Then a correction hit and it dropped to $7,100. That number, 7,100, is the number that ends most people's investing careers. Not because it's a lot of money in the scheme of the market, because it's real money to Danielle. It's more than a month of her rent. Watching it appear on her phone at 11 at night, down $1,100 from what she put in, is the exact moment year one is designed to test. Danielle almost sold. She told herself she would get back in when things calmed down. That's the year one checkpoint talking, on schedule. Here's where the obvious objection shows up, and it deserves a real answer instead of a dismissal. Someone watching this will say, but what if I actually need that money? What if it's not a 14-month dip, it's my roof or my car or a medical bill? That's fair, and it matters. If the money has a job within the next 1 to 3 years, it should not be in the market at all. Full stop. That is not this video's argument. But look at who actually sells during a downturn. Research on retirement account behavior during major market drops has repeatedly found that the overwhelming majority of account holders, well over 95% in some of the largest studied downturns, do not sell anything. They keep contributing on autopilot and ride it out. The people who panic and sell are a real group, but they're a minority, and they're disproportionately the same people checking their balance weekly instead of quarterly. Danielle didn't sell. Not because she felt calm, she didn't. She left it alone because she had automated the contribution before she ever saw the drop, and canceling it would have required a decision she hadn't built a process for. 14 months after the correction, her account was worth $11,400. The dip was not the story. It was one paragraph in a much longer one. The alternative to Danielle's 14 months of white-knuckling is not a better stock pick. It's a worse-looking, more boring decision made in advance, before the emotional part of her brain gets a vote. Here's the actual math on discipline versus timing. An investor who stayed fully invested through a rough decade, say the 2000s, where the market round-tripped through 2 major crashes, ended the period with real gains once dividends were reinvested. An investor with the same $10,000 who jumped out after each downturn and reinvested only once things felt safe again would have missed the sharpest recovery days, the ones that happen within weeks of the bottom, not months after. Studies on this are almost eerily consistent. Missing just the 10 best market days over a 20-year stretch can cut your total return by half. Half! Not from bad investments, from bad timing, driven entirely by emotion. Run that gap forward. A steady 10% average return versus an emotionally interrupted 6 or 7% average return on the same $10,000 over 30 years. Steady compounding gets you past $170,000. Interrupted compounding, the version most people actually experience, lands closer to $60,000 or $70,000. Same starting amount, same market. The only difference is who blinked and when. Reframe who benefits when you blink. Every time you sell in a panic and buy back in once it feels safe, you're paying a spread to someone. The brokerage collects a trade. The person who bought your shares at the bottom, often an institution with no emotional stake at all, collects your fear as their return. You're not removing risk when you sell low. You're transferring your discomfort into someone else's profit. So here's the actual action, not a slogan. Tonight, write down the date 7 years from today. Put it somewhere you'll see it, not a note buried in your phone. That date is your floor. Between now and then, your only job during a downturn is not to make a decision, because the decision has already been made for you, correctly, in advance. If you have money that needs to exist in the next 1 to 3 years, none of this applies to it. That money should be safe and boring and nowhere near a stock chart. And that's not a failure of discipline, that's just correct planning.
But for the money that has 7 years or more in front of it, the goal was never to be smart enough to time it. The goal was to be boring enough to survive your own year 1, year 3, and year 5, long enough for year 7 to do what it was always going to do anyway.
Please subscribe.